And now we're back to the Python Institute. This time we're working on lab number 2.1.6.9. Now previously we were in 2.1.4.10, which is quite a big jump as far as jumping from chapter 4 to chapter 10, but that's where the next lab is. Definitely read through those other pages and make sure you understand what they mean. Otherwise, what we're doing here won't necessarily mean a whole lot to you. So let's see, 2.1.6.9, objectives, becoming familiar with the inputting and outputting of data. All right, so we're going to be inputting data and modifying it looks like. And then evaluating simple expressions. Let's see, so your scenario, your task is to complete the code in order to evaluate the results of 4 basic arithmetic operations. Arithmetic, add, subtract, multiply, delete. The results have to be printed to the console. You may not be able to protect the code from a user who wants to divide by 0, and that's fine. Don't worry about that right now. You'll see what happens if we try to divide by 0 in the future. It causes some problems, but that's fine. We won't worry about that at this point. Lastly, test the code, and then we won't show you any test data. 2 plus 3, that's 5, right? 2 minus 3, that should be -1. We'll find out. All right, so there's a couple of different things we have to do here. The second one, actually, I'll start off with the second one, which is this right here. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. At this point, we've kind of done all of those. So that really should be fairly simple. What we're going to do is we're just going to have a print statement because it wants us to output the results. So we're going to have a print statement, and then we're going to have 2 variables. Call them A and B. There we go, A and B. So we're going to have 2 variables, and we're simply going to print out, hey, A plus B is 5. And then A minus B is -1, and A times B is 6. So that's really all we're going to be doing here, as far as the second item to worry about here. The first item, however, is right here. It says input a float value for a variable, and so how do we actually get the input? How do we get input from the end user? How do we prompt the end user to tell us something? And for that, we actually use the input keyword. Not only that, but we also are going to be using, we also want to specify a float value, so we're going to be using a float keyword as well. So we'll take a look at how that works. So we're going to start off with our variable A. Since they've already assigned us a letter, we're just going to use the letter A, so A equals. I put spaces around the equals. It makes it a little bit easier to read. It's not a requirement. I'm actually going to reading this from the right to the left. So we have a variable A. It then says we want a float value. So I have to use the float function in order to specify the output, or whatever input we're getting from the end user will be of a float type. So I'm going to put this into parentheses. Inside of that, we want to get information from the end user, and so we're going to use the input function as well. So input and then parentheses again. Now we want this to actually say something to our end user, so I'm going to put in a value, or put in a string here called enter a value for A colon, sure. And right there, actually down at the very bottom here, I'm going to just print, actually no, right here. I'm just going to type print parentheses A, close parentheses. So in theory, what we're going to do is we're going to prompt the end user for the value for A. We're then going to convert that to a float and assign it to the variable named A. Then we're going to print that out. And that's all we're going to do. It'll print that's all, folks, but that's all. So go ahead and run that. And it says enter a value for A. Now, let's go ahead and type in a value. And it spit out the number 5. Not just the number 5, but 5.0, because 5.0 is a float value, whereas the number 5 is what's called an integer value. So let's try that again. Value for A, 3.141. All right, my program didn't like me. 3.14159. Enter. And there we go, 3.14159. That's interesting. Playing games with me. All right, so that is a float value. Out of curiosity, let's try something that's not a number. Let's try typing in hello and see what happens. And we get an error saying, no, you can't convert a string to a float. Can't change letters into a number. That's kind of expected, and that's actually kind of nice that it would tell us that before continuing on. All right, so let's clean that up. And then let's essentially do the same thing for B. B equals float. Input. And enter a value for B. And I'm actually going to add a space after this colon here because previously it wasn't putting a space here, and I didn't necessarily like that. So I'm putting a space at the end there just to add in some, just to look a little bit better. All right, output the result of addition here. So we want to add A plus B. Well, let's type in a print statement in order to print that out, to output it to the end user. And in order to make this really friendly, I'm going to say actually A plus B equals, and then I'm going to type in a comma and A plus B. So everything that's inside the quotes here is a string. It's just going to print that out. It's going to print out A plus B equals. It's then going to take the values of A and B and it's going to add them together and print that out. So let's check it out. Go ahead and run that. Enter a value for A. Let's go with 2. It does not like me. All right, you know what? I may have to go to a different editor. All right, joys of the internet. Sometimes things just stop working. So I'm going back to the REPL.it languages Python 3 in order to do the Python editor. So hopefully this one will be a little bit more reliable. So let's go ahead and run this. It should start off by asking me for the value for A. I'll go ahead and type in the number 2 and enter. Value for B, number 3. And then it prints out A plus B equals 5.0. All right, perfect. So that was for addition. Now we should be able to do the same thing for subtraction. Now I could go ahead and I could retype this line right here and changing all the pluses to minuses. I'm a little lazy. So I'm going to just copy this and I'm going to paste it right here. I'm going to change the pluses to minuses. Let's go ahead and run that. And again, 2 and 3. It tells me A plus B is 5. A minus B is -1. So 2 minus 3 is -1. That sounds right. If you're not familiar with how negative numbers work in there, take my word for it. Well, if that worked for subtraction, I'm going to paste in for multiplication and division. And I'm just going to change these to a star for multiply. And then a / for divide. And now 2 and 3. And it gives me some numbers. And then I can type this in with other numbers as well. And it continues giving me those numbers as necessary. All right. And so that's how you would do it. I'm not sure why that was freaking out on me, but that's pretty much it. So again, we start off by first asking the end user for some input. Now the input command didn't have to have any string in front of it. I could have done this in two different ways. I could have said simply print, enter a value for A, and then deleted that out of the input statement. So the first print statement would have simply printed out to the screen, and then the input statement would have taken whatever input was there. And so now if I run this, it'll look a little different because the print statement returned me onto the next line, but it still accepted the number 6 in for the value of A. I could have end equals in order to stop it from going onto a new line as well. So the input statement takes input from the console, and it takes it up until you hit enter. The float statement then converts the number, which in this case were all integers, but they could have been anything with a decimal point. It converts it into a float value that can then be added and multiplied and divided. We then have 4 different print statements, all fairly simple. We start off by printing a string, something inside of quotes, and then comma. And then this time, instead of just simply writing one variable, such as the letter A or the letter B, here we're saying A plus B, and we're having it do math for us inside of those parentheses.